Welcome to York Plasterers, A&B Plasterers York, your trusted service since 1962.
Okay, York Plasterers, 7 tips on how to skim a wall. Tip number 1, when you first start off plastering a wall, you shouldn't worry too much about making it smooth. Instead, you should focus on making the walls as flat as possible. Let me explain. You don't want to have different thicknesses of plaster, as these will dry out at different times, making this difficult to apply further plaster coats. Now, a big DIY mistake is too much time is often spent making the first coat of plaster smooth. You don't need to. Not enough time is spent making sure that the first coat is flat and even in thickness, so don't spend too much time making the plaster smooth in the beginning. If your plaster is flat, then when you apply the next coats, you can move along the wall easily to finish the job. In the final stages, you smooth out the wall by removing any trowel marks or ridges as you go along. Now, tip number 2. Some people, especially professionals, like to skim a coat of a wall with a hawk and trowel. To do this, you need to be able to transfer the plaster from the hawk to the wall and apply the plaster in a sweeping motion. Now, it takes a bit of practice, but it's doable for the DIYer as long as they don't get too ambitious too quickly. Start small and build up to a big wall. Don't start on the big wall first. Tip number 3, a big wall or any wall really needs to be plastered in one go, letting the plaster harden a little before moving on to the next coat. It could take up to 3 or more coats to be able to achieve the perfect finish. Tip number 4, when you put your first coat of plaster on, allow time for it to harden. For it to harden off, not fully, but enough to be able to then take the second coat of plaster without dragging the first coat off, which will happen if you try to put the second coat on straight away after you put the first one on. Tip 5, if you are skimming over an old wall, then depending on the starting condition of the wall will determine how much plaster and coats you will need to apply. A plaster-boarded stud wall will be easier for the DIY plasterer, provided the plasterboards have been fixed correctly. Really important to fix them correctly. Tip 6, you should use less plaster on a newly boarded wall. Some of the new builds really do put hardly any plaster on, not enough usually, and are the biggest cause for snagging issues to house builders. But when you're doing your own house, put enough plaster on, don't scrimp on it. Tip 7, clean your tools between coats. Your trowel and your hawk board especially, you need to keep them spotless, you don't want plaster setting on them. And the bonus tip, a DIYer should with practice be able to skim plaster a small wall to a reasonable finish, but if you find it daunting or prefer to have it done by a professional York plasterer, then at A&B Plastering of York would be happy to give you a quote. You may actually find the time it would take to do it yourself for a relatively small increase in budget for your project. You could just pay a York plaster professional such as A&B Plastering to do it, knowing it will be done to perfection. Whichever way you decide to go for wall skimming, thanks for watching our video. Bye for now.